This is the true story of how the gentlest voice on the radio disappeared in a single morning. How a woman who sang about closeness and love died alone in a closet. And how millions of people who thought they knew her realized they had never seen her pain at all. I am going to take you back to February 4th, 1983, a quiet Friday morning in Downey, California. A day that was supposed to be about endings and new beginnings. Instead, it became the day the music stopped. Many of you remember exactly where you were when you heard the news. Some of you were driving. Some were making breakfast. Some heard it on the radio between songs that she had sung. And for a moment, the world felt a little colder. Who she was. If you're reading this, you probably already know her voice. You have heard it at weddings, on long drives, in your parents' living room, maybe even in a hospital room or at a funeral. Karen Carpenter's contralto was warm, clear, and impossibly close, like she was singing just for you. She was born in New Haven, Connecticut, in 1950, but she grew up in Downey, a working-class suburb of Los Angeles, where palm trees lined quiet streets and families still left their doors unlocked. Her family moved west when she was 13, chasing the California dream that so many East Coast families believed in back then. She started as a drummer. That is what she loved most. She would sit behind the kit with a focus and power that surprised everyone who saw her. Drumming made her feel strong. Drumming made her feel in control. But the world wanted to hear her sing, and so she did. With her brother Richard at the piano, the Carpenters became the softest sound of the 1970s. Close to You, We've Only Just Begun, Rainy Days and Mondays, Top of the World. They were not cool. They were not edgy. Critics sometimes mocked them for being too safe, too sweet, too middle American. But they were real. And in a decade of protest songs and hard rock, millions of people, especially your generation, wanted something that felt like home. Karen's voice gave them that. It was the sound of safety, of Sunday mornings, of a world that still made sense. By the end of the 1970s, the Carpenters had sold over 100 million records worldwide. They had 3 Grammy Awards, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, gold albums lining the walls, and their own television specials that families gathered around to watch. Karen Carpenter was one of the most famous women in the world. Magazines put her face on their covers. Radio stations played her songs every hour. Strangers recognized her in supermarkets and restaurants. But she did not feel famous. She felt invisible, because no matter how loud the applause got, there was one voice she never heard say the words she needed most. The years leading up to the end, to understand. February 4th, 1983. You have to go back a few years. You have to understand what was happening behind the album covers and the smiles. By the late 1970s, Karen's weight had become a public topic. Journalists wrote about it. Photographers noticed it. Fans sent letters asking if she was okay. In 1975, she weighed around 120 pounds, a healthy weight for a woman who stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. But someone, some say a critic, some say a journalist, called her chubby in print. That word stayed with her. It burrowed into her mind and would not let go. She started dieting. At first it seemed normal. Lots of performers watched their weight. But for Karen, it became something else. It became the one thing in her life she could control. Her career was managed by others. Her music was arranged by Richard. Her schedule was decided by record executives and tour managers. Even her love life was watched and commented on by strangers. But her body? That was hers, or so she thought. By 1975, she weighed 91 pounds. By 1980, she had dropped to 77 pounds, so thin that her heart began to fail. Her hair started falling out, and her body could no longer regulate its own temperature. She wore layers of clothing even in warm weather because she was always cold. Friends who hugged her said it felt like holding a skeleton. Still, she performed. She smiled in interviews. She recorded albums. She told everyone she was fine. In 1981, her family finally convinced her to seek treatment. She checked into a clinic in New York run by Dr. Stephen Levincron, a psychotherapist who specialized in eating disorders. She stayed for several months. She gained weight. She started talking about her feelings, about her mother, about Richard, about the pressure, about the loneliness. When she left treatment in 1982, she weighed around 108 pounds. She looked healthier. She had color in her face again. Her friends thought the worst was over. But eating disorders do not end when the weight comes back. The thoughts do not just disappear. The fear does not just go away. Karen had been using ipecac syrup, a drug meant to induce vomiting in cases of poisoning. to purge food from her body. She hid it. She used it in secret, and over months and years, it poisoned her heart from the inside. By early 1983, she seemed optimistic. She was finalizing her divorce from Thomas Burris, a real estate developer she had married in 1980 and separated from just months later. She and Richard were planning to go back into the studio. There was talk of a new tour, a new album, a fresh start. She told friends she had a lot of living left to do. The last day, on the night of February 3, 1983, Karen stayed at her parents' house in Downey. The same house she had grown up in, the same house where she and Richard had rehearsed in the garage, the same house where her mother Agnes still ruled every room. She had been out shopping that day, looking at washers and dryers for the condominium in Century City that she was getting ready to move into. She seemed happy. She talked about decorating. She talked about independence. She talked about starting over. She had dinner with her parents that evening. Pot roast, maybe. Something ordinary. Something that felt like family. Even if family had never felt easy. After dinner, she watched some television. She made a phone call to a friend. She said goodnight to her mother and father. Then she went upstairs to her childhood bedroom, the same room with the same furniture, the same closet where she used to hide as a little girl. She went to bed. She set her alarm. She was supposed to meet Richard the next day to sign papers for the new album. The next morning, February 4th, she woke up early, around 8 a.m. She went downstairs to the kitchen. She started the coffee pot, the way she always did. The house was quiet. Her parents were still upstairs. Then she walked back up to her bedroom. She opened the sliding door to her walk-in closet, and then, without warning, she collapsed. Her mother, Agnes, found her a few minutes later. Karen was lying on the floor of the closet. Her eyes were open, but rolled back. She was not breathing normally. Her skin was pale and cold. Agnes screamed. She called for Harold, Karen's father. He ran upstairs. They called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They found Karen's heart beating once every 10 seconds, just 6 beats per minute when a normal heart beats 60 to 100 times. They started CPR. They loaded her onto a stretcher. They rushed her to Downey Community Hospital, less than 2 miles away. Doctors worked on her for nearly an hour. They tried everything, but her heart was too damaged. It had been starved and poisoned for too long. At 9:51 a.m. on February 4th, 1983, Karen Carpenter was pronounced dead. She was 32 years old. What killed her? The autopsy was released 5 weeks later, on March 11th, 1983. The findings were medical, but the truth behind them was devastatingly human. Karen Carpenter died of heart failure caused by emetine cardiotoxicity, poisoning from ipecac syrup, a substance she had been using secretly to make herself vomit. Emetine is a chemical that, when used repeatedly, accumulates in heart muscle tissue and destroys it from the inside. Her heart weighed only 80 grams, less than half the normal size for a woman her age. It was shrunken, weakened, unable to sustain the basic rhythm of life. Her blood sugar at the time of death was over 100 milligrams per deciliter, more than 10 times the normal range. Some doctors believe this metabolic chaos triggered a fatal arrhythmia, a moment when her heart simply gave up. She had weighed 77 pounds at her lowest point in 1980. By the time she died, she had gained weight back and was around 108 pounds, a number that made everyone around her breathe easier, a number that made them believe she was getting better. But the damage was already done. Years of starvation, laxative abuse, thyroid medication misuse, and purging had eroded her body beyond repair. This was not a sudden tragedy. It was not an accident. It was slow. It had been happening in plain sight for years, on stage, in interviews, in photographs that showed a woman growing smaller and smaller while the world watched and did not understand. How the world reacted. When the news broke on the afternoon of February 4th, radio stations across America interrupted their regular programming. Some played her songs back to back. Some did not know what to say. For many DJs, it felt like losing someone they knew personally, even though they had never met her. Phone lines at radio stations lit up. Listeners called in crying. They called to share memories. They called to ask how this could have happened. The funeral was held 4 days later, on February 8th, at Downey United Methodist Church, the same church where the Carpenters had recorded some of their Christmas specials. Nearly 1,000 people came. Dionne Warwick was there, Olivia Newton-John, Dorothy Hamill, Petula Clark, John Bettis, who wrote so many of her songs, Herb Alpert, who had signed the Carpenters to A&M Records and believed in them when no one else did, her estranged husband, Thomas Burris, placed his wedding ring in her casket before it was closed. Richard gave the eulogy. He said that Karen was the best person he had ever known. He said she had the voice of an angel. He said he would miss her every day for the rest of his life. But it was the people who were not there. The fans, the listeners, the strangers sitting in living rooms and cars across the country who felt it most deeply. You did not have to know Karen Carpenter to feel like you had lost something. If you grew up in the 70s, her voice was part of your life. It was there at your wedding. It was on the radio when you drove your kids to school. It was the background music of your youth, the soundtrack of the quieter, gentler moments. And now it was gone. In the days and weeks that followed, newspapers and television news programs began using a term most people had never heard before: anorexia nervosa. It was not a well-known illness in 1983. Celebrities did not talk about mental health. Eating disorders were whispered about in private, if they were mentioned at all. Karen Carpenter's death changed that. It forced the conversation into the open. Suddenly, parents, doctors, teachers, and journalists were trying to understand how a woman could starve herself to death while performing on television, while recording hit songs, while the whole world watched. Her death became a turning point in public awareness. Eating disorder clinics saw an increase in calls. Schools started offering education programs. Doctors began recognizing the warning signs they had missed before. But for the generation that grew up with her music, the question was simpler and more painful. How did we not see it? Why her death felt so personal? There is something about Karen Carpenter's story that refuses to let go, even more than 40 years later. Maybe it is because her voice was so kind. Maybe it is because she seemed so normal, so wholesome, so safe. The girl next door who just happened to have the voice of a generation. Or maybe it is because her pain was so quiet. She did not scream for help. She did not make a scene. She smiled in interviews. She performed on stage. She recorded albums. She showed up, and inside she was disappearing, one day at a time. Many of you have told me that you still think about her, that you still listen to her songs and wonder what might have been different. What if someone had understood sooner? What if the people around her had known what to look for? What if she had felt loved for who she was, not just for what she could do? Karen Carpenter was not just a singer. She was a daughter who wanted to please a mother who was never quite pleased. She was a sister who lived in the shadow of her brother's genius and perfectionism. She was a woman who was told she was too heavy when she weighed 140 pounds, and then told she looked great when she weighed 90. She was a perfectionist who could never be perfect enough, not for the industry, not for her family, and not for herself. Her last public appearance was on January 11th, 1983, less than a month before she died. She attended a Grammy event, surrounded by other musicians and industry people. She wore a red dress. She looked thin, but she was smiling. She told Dionne Warwick, "Look at me, I've got an ass." She laughed. She said she had gained weight. She said she had a lot of living left to do. 24 days later, she was gone. The question that remains, the real tragedy of Karen Carpenter's death is not that it happened. It is that it did not have to. She sought treatment. She went to therapy. She saw doctors. She tried to get better. She wanted to live. But the illness was stronger than anyone understood at the time. And the tools to fight it, the medical knowledge, the psychological support, the cultural awareness, were not fully there yet. Today, we know more. We talk more openly about mental health, about eating disorders, about the pressure that fame and perfectionism can put on a human soul. We understand that anorexia is not about vanity or willpower. It is about control, trauma, fear, and pain that has nowhere else to go. But in 1983, Karen Carpenter died almost alone, in a closet, in her childhood home, on a morning that was supposed to be the start of something new. Somewhere tonight, someone is putting on a Carpenter's record. Maybe it is you. Maybe you are remembering the first time you heard Close to You on the radio. Maybe you are thinking about your wedding, or your first apartment, or driving with the windows down on a summer evening in 1972. The softest voice in music fell silent more than 40 years ago. But if you close your eyes and listen, you can still hear her, crystal clear, impossibly close, like she is singing just for you. And maybe that is the saddest part of all, because the voice is still here, warm and alive in every note, but the person is not. If Karen's story still matters to you, share this video with someone who remembers. Leave a comment and tell us, where were you the first time you heard her voice? Do you think her story could have ended differently if people had understood her illness better? What song of hers means the most to you, and why?